And welcome to today's webinar, the Federal Legislative Update, which is being provided to you by the University of Illinois Extension. My name is Kathy Brown, and I work for the University of Illinois Extension as a community and economic development educator. For purposes of sound quality, everyone's microphones are going to be muted during the presentation. We want to encourage you to use the chat space to send questions to the speaker, and I'll be reviewing those at the end of our session, making sure that they get brought forward for discussions. If you have problems, technical problems, we do have technical assistance on the call, and use the chat space there also to share any of those concerns that you may be having, and she'll be able to respond to that. Throughout the presentation, we'll use that and chat space to monitor for comments and questions to the speaker. So for today's webinar, the Federal Legislative Update, we'll be recording the webinar, and this will be made available on our local government education website and YouTube channel. Today's presenter is Jack Peterson from the National Association of Counties. And we're really pleased to have Jack back with us again this year. He serves as the Associate Legislative Director of Finance, Pensions, and Intergovernmental Affairs for the National Association of Counties. And he's going to be discussing with us recent and potential future changes in legislation at the federal levels that will have a direct impact on Illinois local government. Thank you, Jack, for taking time to share your expertise with local governments in Illinois. And at this time, I'll turn over the web platform to Jack.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you to you and everyone at the University of Illinois for setting up this webinar, and thanks to all of our participants for taking the time to log in and be part of this conversation during your lunch hour. I will probably run through my slides here and hope to leave ample time for questions at the end. It's a very interesting time here in Washington, D.C. We have a new Congress that's getting underway, and we also, as I'm sure you all are aware, have a government shutdown that's going on. So I want to make sure that you all have time to ask any questions that you want about any of those things that are going on, or any specific programs that you might be tracking, or anything like that that is going on here at the national level. So just sort of by way of brief overview, I wanted to just quickly introduce NACO, the National Association of Counties, for those who don't know. We are the only national organization that represents all 3,069 counties here in Washington, D.C. as part of the federal governing decision-making process. We also are co-located, for those of you who work with cities on the call or on this webinar, we're co-located with the National League of Cities, which is sort of our city counterpart. We like to think of ourselves here as the local government hub. Two very distinct organizations with distinct memberships, but certainly helps to all be on the same page from a local government perspective. From the county perspective, from the NACO perspective, really excited to be able to do this. For those that are from counties in Illinois, we actually did just reach an agreement with a couple of the state associations representing county officials in Illinois, where all counties in Illinois are actually now part of NACO through that process. Those state associations are actually picking up the dues for this year. So happy to answer more questions about what that means, what it means to be a member of NACO, what that gives you access to. And we do have a conference coming up at the beginning of March here in Washington, D.C. as well. So if at the end of this you are so inspired to come take action yourself, which I hope is the case, we would hope that you'd come join us for that March conference, or at the very least plan your own trip out and come see us in our offices here. We see our office as your office, your seat in the nation's capital, and certainly look forward to talking with you all more and learning about what's going on in your communities as well. So just as a little bit of an additional information on NACO's policymaking process, and sort of we'll walk through a bunch of NACO's policy positions, some of our top concerns going on in DC right now, but did just sort of want to let you all know how that process works. For on almost any policy issue that NACO takes a stance on, it's been fully vetted by our membership across the country and across the organization. It starts with those 10 policy steering committees down there at the bottom. They cover all manner of different issues, and we'll run through what those are in just a second. Anything that goes through a policy steering committee goes to our board of directors. That then goes, our board of directors is 128, 132 members strong. That then goes to the full membership for a vote, and then it becomes part of what we call the American County Platform. The American County Platform is a sort of living document of about 120 to 130 pages that compromises all manner of policy issues relevant to counties that the federal government could take action on in some shape or form, or that we think that counties think the federal government should take action on. So just really briefly on what those 10 policy steering committees are. Here's a list of them on your screen. Everything from, we like to say, A to Z, but really ag and rural affairs. You have, environment, energy, and land use, health, human services, justice and public safety. As Kathy said, I handle the finance, pensions, and intergovernmental affairs work. I also am actually serving as our deputy director of government affairs now, so I do a lot of the cross-cutting work. There are lots of issues that work between land use and public lands, or human services and the public safety realm, health and the public safety realm, things like that. So many different ways. Again, just going back to the membership piece, any county who is a member of NACO can have a person on any one of these committees, and if there's a specific issue area that you are interested in or that you handle as part of your work in your county, we'd love to have your voice on this decision-making and policy-making body. And the last thing that I will say about NACO membership is that it's not just the elected officials. Certainly, they are a very important voice, but we also have all manner of different staff from chief administrative officers, county administrators, all the way to county human services directors, sheriffs, things like that. So certainly encourage you all to be involved if there's a place that makes sense as part of our process. We'll get a little bit more into what our 2019 legislative priorities are shortly, but first just want to set the stage for you all. We have a president who's entered his third year as of a couple days ago. We have a speaker who is entering her second term as speaker, but after quite a hiatus in the speaker's office. We have a new minority leader in the House who previously was under Speaker Ryan before he retired. And we have Senator Mitch McConnell and Senator Chuck Schumer overseeing all the work in the Senate. So a split Congress, a split Congress and White House, divided federal government sets the stage for some really interesting conversations. I will say, as sort of a base level, generally we find that a split Congress gives us the best opportunity as counties to engage in the process. They have to seek bipartisan solutions. They have to seek common sense solutions. And that gives us an opportunity to say, here's what we're hearing on the ground. Here's what we need. We need you to come together to meet this goal. Hopefully that will be the case for the next couple of years, but as we'll discuss, there are certainly a couple of roadblocks to that. Taking a step back and looking at the last Congress, just very briefly, it was about on pace with some of the previous Congresses that, as far as sort of actual legislating and passing of bills, that actually, from a percentage standpoint, was almost exactly the same. 3% of all the bills that were introduced passed last year. That's not, as you can see, terribly out of the norm, but that 3% is actually of a higher number of bills than the last couple of Congresses. So it's actually a little bit more work than what we actually might have seen the last couple of Congresses. Certainly many county priorities included in a lot of those, and we'll touch on those as we go forward. But the big news out of the end of last year, of course, was the 2018 midterm elections. And I'm sure you all are familiar with this, so we'll quickly run through sort of where we sit now. On the Senate side, Republicans retained control of the Senate. They hold 53 seats. They picked up 4 seats that were previously held by Democrats, Meanwhile, Democrats picked up 2 in Nevada and Arizona. So certainly not as big of a swing as perhaps some thought it might be, but definitely a more comfortable margin. You all might recall that last year the Senate only was, Republicans only had 51 seats in the Senate, and that meant that any senator at any given point could really throw a wrench in the process if they wanted to hold something up. So certainly a little bit more of a cushion now as far as what's going on in the Senate. Of course, all of that is not without the caveat that usually the Senate still needs 60 votes to get anything passed. So there's definitely still a stronger bipartisan requirement for action in the Senate, and we're of course already seeing some of that play out with the government shutdown so far. On the House side, as you all know, Democrats took the House. We really like this map because it shows the sort of spread of seats as opposed to sort of covering the land mass of different things. The big changes, of course, lots of seats flipping out in California, lots of seats flipping in New York, a couple of seats flipping there in Illinois as well. But also, still a fairly steady split across the country. The Democratic majority in this Congress is roughly the same as what the Republican majority was last year as well. So certainly still dynamics at play in the new House caucus over some of the demands from different portions of the Democratic caucus, same thing on the Republican side as well. So the one thing that I really do want to highlight from a county perspective, one thing that we track very closely is those members of Congress who have former county experience. So in the Senate, there's a pretty good handful, again, a very clear bipartisan split across the country of people who at some point held a position in a county, and we really look to these members as our champions on a lot of different issues. They've got great experience on everything from being the county elected official to Senator Ernst, for example, from Iowa, who was a county auditor, which runs the auditors in Iowa run elections. So we really lean on those members for their experience and being champions for us in the new Congress as well. On the House side, there's obviously a lot more because there are more House members in general. There are about 85 county officials, former county officials in Congress this year. Your bolded ones there are people who just won their first term this year and are new to Congress. And we'll move on to the second page here as well to show you a handful of others that are new. There is one on that last page from Illinois who was a former Cook County board member. So certainly a very important group of people, often the people who you will see as some of the first sponsors and co-sponsors on bills that we really push forward, and really sort of across the board and across party lines, great relationships, great people who are county and really local government champions for things going on here in DC. And to be frank, if we expanded this list to include former city officials, it would be much longer. And if we further expanded it to include former state legislators, it would obviously be substantially longer. So a great group of former state and local elected officials to help us get the things done that we want to see done here in DC. So all of that said, I will start by talking about the thing that's on everyone's minds, and that's the government shutdown. We are now inching into day 34 of the government shutdown, and I guess not inching in, proudly strolling into day 34 of the government shutdown. And while there have been some potential sort of cracks in both Democratic and Republican strategies on this, we don't necessarily feel like a resolution is right around the corner. We think it's indicative that the president has decided not to hold the State of the Union address on the 29th. Obviously, Speaker Pelosi sort of uninvited him, I guess you could say, and the president was thinking about doing it somewhere else and has decided not to do that. So we take that as a symbol that we're not sure we'll reach a final agreement by January 29th, which is next week. But there's lots of different impacts of this across the country. Obviously, impacts on federal workers across the country, impacts on federal parks, All of the museums here in Washington, D.C. are closed for the moment because they run on federal funding. So there are many, many different pieces to this. From the county angle, there are a big handful of programs that we are very closely watching. Some of them have already ceased making payments. Some of them have stopped accepting new payments. Some of those include some of the Section 8 housing vouchers, low-income housing programs. We are looking at the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which is food stamps, sort of better known as food stamps, as a program that currently has funding through the end of February, but might not beyond that, and what impact that could have on counties, county local social services, things like that. And there's actually another one that we're starting to track as well, and that's some counties contract with the federal government to hold federal inmates, and then the federal government pays, pays the county a certain amount each day for those inmates, and those payments as of right now have stopped. And so we're working to get a better handle on how many counties do that across the country, what that total sort of financing burden looks like as well. So, if anyone had a crystal ball and was able to tell you, they would be all over national TV, making sure that everyone knew what was going to happen. But I think right now it's particularly hard to tell. There are portions of both the Republican Party, as we see some senators on the Republican side start to indicate they would vote for a bill with no money for a wall at the border in it. And then on the Democratic side, we saw 30 members of the House put out a letter yesterday suggesting that Speaker Pelosi guarantee some sort of vote in the House for a bill on that border wall funding if the president would agree to reopen the government without the border wall funding included in the bill. So certainly some cracks on both sides, but as of right now, we're not totally sure what the next step is. So I apologize for this next slide, as it is already out of date. Normally the State of the Union is in late January. We are already getting very close to that February 4th deadline for the president to submit an annual budget to Congress. That is almost always, under any administration, that is almost always late. So don't be surprised if that's the case this year, but it could be even further delayed as secretaries and staffs of different agencies are either called back from the shutdown or are not allowed and permitted to work on this during the shutdown. A big thing that's on the radar for us and for others, as far as a point of potential agreement or needing to get something done at least, is this March 2nd deadline for the debt ceiling. Over the years, this has been a sort of fulcrum point for lawmakers to attach different things that both parties would want to see done to that debt ceiling increase. And then, sort of fast forwarding through most of the summer, looking ahead to October is when fiscal year 2020 begins. And that could prove another sort of contentious point for government funding if there's no agreement reached on border wall, border security funding, things like that at that point. So that's sort of an overview of what we expect this year. Now I'd like to sort of take a little bit of a shift and go into what some of the county priorities are for the 116th Congress. And on our website, we have our NACO's 2019 priorities that are developed in consultation with our policy steering committees, with the board of directors, with a handful of other leaders within the organization, and then ultimately approved by the board. So there are 7 of them this year, and again, would encourage you all to go check these out on our website. There are links to other sort of more in-depth fact sheets, documents, things like that. But the first one is promoting county infrastructure priorities and a comprehensive infrastructure package. We talked a little bit about, or I shared a little bit about the opportunity for bipartisan work in a split Congress. And absent a government shutdown, most people think that an infrastructure package is the sort of number one place where bipartisan action may happen. There's been a lot of interest on this on both sides of the aisle the last few years. There's agreement amongst both our former county officials, but also all other members of Congress, that something needs to be done to upgrade the county's infrastructure across the country. NACO has a number of different policy positions related to this. We sort of advocate an all the tools in the toolbox approach. So that means, yes, new financing options should be available, whether that's public-private partnerships or looking at new ways to incentivize bonds, things like that. But we also believe that direct funding should be a very important piece of an infrastructure package. It cannot just be states and local governments picking up the bill here. We need a strong federal partner. To that end, there's a lot of questions about where would that money come from. The administration proposed what was a $1 and then a $1.5 trillion infrastructure package that relied on some new money, but again, it was not totally clear where that money was coming from. And one thing that's been floated a lot is a potential increase to the gas tax. NACO has policy, again, under our sort of all of the above approach that would support an increase in the gas tax. Obviously, we don't want it to be sort of too extreme at once, but by increasing and or indexing it to inflation, that would provide a steady source of revenue for this infrastructure package and also infrastructure projects going forward into the future. So infrastructure, again, a great opportunity. We also look very closely under the infrastructure bucket at streamlining the federal permitting process. Oftentimes we hear horror stories of counties having projects caught up in a 10, 12, 15-year permitting process. And so we're working very closely with the administration on streamlining that process down, having one central decision maker for those permits, for the process in general, so that counties can get projects off the ground, get capital to market, and really move the ball forward in some of these places. So again, infrastructure, I think I spent a lot of time on it, but I think it's a really big, important one for us through the rest of this year. The next one that I'll cover is a program called the Payment in Lieu of Taxes and Secure Rural Schools programs. Those are programs that reimburse counties. The PILT program is one that reimburses counties that have public lands in their county that is therefore federal public lands that's not subject to property tax collection. It's a reimbursement program for those counties. Obviously, it's particularly big out in some of the western states that have the sort of big national parks in them. But as you can see in the graphic, 62% of counties across the country have federal land within their boundaries. So if you're one of those counties that has that federal land within your boundary, you should be getting at least a nominal PILT payment each year. The Secure Rural Schools program is sort of even more focused on some of those western counties and is about reimbursing counties that previously had strong economies from revenues from timber, but then as some of the logging restrictions were put in place, those receipts fell. And so the Secure Rural Schools program was instituted to help build up some of the local public education services that had previously been funded by those timber receipts. So a couple of big programs there for a lot of counties across the country. Third is supporting implementation of the Farm Bill, and this gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about last Congress, where we saw a new Farm Bill passed, which governs all of our agriculture, rural economic development, and food and nutrition programs from the federal government. The Farm Bill encompasses, it's almost $100 billion adventure each year. The food stamps program is a big part of that. But many of the economic development programs included in it are specifically targeted at rural communities and rural counties. So we were very, very pleased to see this get through. It was done in a bipartisan fashion. We're very excited about both of those things. And now it's making sure it's implemented properly. It's making sure that the agency works with counties as they push out new grants, as they stand up a couple of offices that we requested they set up in the bill, and as the sort of small changes that were included to the food stamps program move forward. So again, a big win from our perspective. There were actually 5 amendments to the Farm Bill legislation that NACO specifically worked on with the members of Congress considering that bill that were ultimately included. So a big win for counties, and certainly an important thing to make sure is stood up correctly going into this year. Next on the list is waters of the U.S. and establishing a more effective definition. Waters of the U.S., for those not familiar, is a term used under the Clean Water Act. It governs which waters across the country are subject to certain regulations and different environmental protections, things like that. A waters of the U.S. New definition was proposed in 2015 that would have included almost every single different type of waterway or place that held water at some point under the definition, including most of the ditches alongside county roads. That really is where the sort of rubber meets the road, pun kind of intended, for our membership. And so we went back to the Environmental Protection Agency, asked them to consider many of those roadside ditches don't have water in them for the vast majority of the year, and it would really sort of curb the amount of upkeep work, new infrastructure on those roads that we do. It also governed some of the bridges, those sorts of things as well. So we actually expect a new Waters of the U.S. rule to be released as soon as the government opens back up, or within a week or two of the government opening back up. EPA is one of the agencies that is shut down right now. So that's right around the corner. We will certainly have a lot more information on it. And actually, we are putting on a webinar on February 4th on the Waters of the U.S. Rule. And would love to have you all join that if you'd like to learn more about sort of what's coming down the pipeline. Next on our list of top priorities is promoting mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and criminal justice reform in general. NACO runs a couple of different programs on this. The first that I'll mention is the Stepping Up Initiative, which encourages counties to enact policies that reduce the use of jails as the primary treatment facility for individuals with mental illnesses. So we found that across the country, every county is having this problem that rather than being diverted to a mental health facility or a medical facility, individuals with mental illness are just being arrested and put in jails. And that costs both the individual the opportunity to get the treatment they need, and also the county a significant amount of money while housing those individuals. So this is also very related to the opioid epidemic and other substance use epidemics that are going on. NACO was instrumental in passing a couple of different large bills related to the opioid epidemic. We actually asked for a couple of provisions in there to make sure grant programs got down to counties rather than just to states. So we will continue to work and make sure that those are funded appropriately and that money gets distributed appropriately. Lastly, I will say a big focus of ours in this arena is the role of counties in providing health care for individuals while they are in jail, specifically while they're in jail before awaiting trial. Most federal health programs, whether it's through Medicaid or even through the Veterans Administration, if they're a veteran receiving benefits through the Veteran Health Administration, once they're booked into a jail, generally those benefits are cut off. There's a couple concerns we have with that. One is when they're cut off rather than just paused, it makes it much harder for the individual to get it reinstituted after they leave jail. And that it provides a sort of scenario where, again, if they need help and are not able to access that federal health benefit that they previously had, they're more likely to end up back in jail on the back end. So we want to reduce that sort of recidivism. But the other concern is that then once that federal health benefit stops, the county is paying for any of their health needs while they're in jail. So NACO is actually working to get a bill introduced this year and sort of start a campaign around maintaining Medicaid, maintaining VA payments while individuals are pretrial. Again, they have not been convicted of any crime, so pursuant to our justice system and presuming innocence, they should also be able to maintain their health benefits while the justice system sort of works through the process. So this is a big one for us. Happy to chat more about it at the end. Two other top priorities to cover here, and then we'll take some questions. One is boosting broadband deployment and accessibility while preserving local zoning authority. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this because it can get very technical very quickly, but the long and short of it is that there was a rule put down by the Federal Communications Commission that would have preempted local governments and specifically county governments' ability to properly take the time to analyze and authorize placement of wireless broadband services. They put in a rule that said if a county doesn't process an application within 30 days, no matter how big the application is, no matter how many applications they get, any of that, the provider may either just put up the wireless service right away, or they can sue to go to court to have that same action. And that's a major concern for us as sort of the protectors and purveyors of public safety and of public rights of way. So a big concern for us is just making sure that we continue to really elaborate on what the county role is in this process. Again, sort of taking that public safety angle and saying, if a provider wants to come into our community and make sure broadband is better there, we are all for that. We just want to make sure that wherever they put their tower or wherever they put this cell device isn't a public safety hazard, and we need to make sure we take the time in order to do that. So that's a big one for us and will be a big one for the next few years going forward as well. And then finally, a top priority for us is promoting economic mobility and opportunity across all counties. And this cartoon is a little bit facetious, but really the place that we want to get to is many parts of the country over the last decade have seen a sort of positive economic trend, but we want to make sure that in places where that's not shared, and whether that's specific demographics as geographic places or as certain segments of the population, we want to make sure that all counties are in a position to provide their residents that economic opportunity. That means working on workforce programs, on economic development opportunities. We have a number of both federal initiatives, but also NACO programs that individuals can access. So definitely a big priority for us looking across the country. I wanted to mention just two other things really quickly. The first is election reforms. We actually saw a big package introduced in the House that don't tell any of the House members that I said this, but certainly won't go anywhere as far as passing the House and the Senate and being signed by the President. But there has been a lot of talk about what the role of the federal government is in funding election reforms. All the money at this point from the 2002 Help America Vote Act for buying voting machines and things like that has been spent. So as that technology ages, as we look to maybe needing paper ballots or some sort of paper trail that's auditable, what's the role of the federal government in helping purchase some of those things? And from the county perspective, we run most of the election on the ground. We certainly work in partnership with our states and our secretaries of state, but most of the picking polling locations, finding poll workers, purchasing voting equipment, setting up the voting equipment, ensuring the safety and security of the voting system, both at the physical polling place and sort of in cyberspace, those are all county responsibilities. So we really want to make sure that those are understood at sort of a basic level, and then as more funding is talked about, that we make sure that money gets to the local level, to counties, not just is sent to states for states to decide what to do with. So that's a big one. The last one that I'll mention is one other win that we had last year, and there are sort of different aspects of this that might be applicable to Illinois, but we saw a disaster bill go through last year that did include some disaster funding, but more importantly included a provision that prevents the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, from clawing back any money that they spent or that FEMA sent out after 3 years. So right now, some counties have had major disasters. They've had FEMA come in, they've had FEMA send them money, and then 10 years later, FEMA says, we don't like how you spent that money, give it back to us. And that puts counties in a real bind. So this is now in law that FEMA only has 3 years to make that determination. And then from there on out, the county doesn't have to be worried about maintaining those forms, tracking the funding, all that sort of stuff. So that's a big win from our perspective as well. So I'm going to just sort of close by, thanking everyone again for taking the time. That is really just a sort of short snapshot of things that are going on here. There's sort of a whole other list of different priorities and places and things we'll be looking at, and once the shutdown is over, we'll very quickly be looking forward to the fiscal year 2020. And of course, the one thing that I did not mention that is sort of underneath everyone's consciousness right now is that the 2020 election, the next presidential election, appears to have already started. We've already had, I think last I saw, 9 different individuals formally declare their candidacy on the Democratic side. Technically, I think probably only 5 or so of those who are current elected officials and or have the name recognition to really get off the ground. But certainly the backdrop of that already starting means that in some ways there will be even more political jockeying in Congress this year and next year. So with all that said, it's going to be a very interesting time. I will put a quick plug in for NACO's legislative conference, which is here starting March 2nd and running through March 6th. It's here in Washington, D.C. You can go on our website or just search NACO 2019 Legislative Conference, and all the details are there. The schedule is there. We'll have 24 or so different educational workshops. All the policy steering committee meetings are open to the public and open to any other attendees. So you are all very welcome to join those meetings, to come listen in. We'll have a couple general sessions with a couple secretaries to be named later that I cannot name right now to come join, as well as some senators and a couple keynote speakers. And then on Tuesday, March 5th, we have a full day of meetings sort of set aside for Capitol Hill, where we'll have a couple briefings with different members of Congress on different issues. We'll have a press conference on some issues. And then if you all would like to meet with any of your representatives, we certainly set aside time for you to go do that as well. So with all that said, Kathy, it's 1:37 my time, which means I've probably already talked for too long, but would love to sort of stop there and open it up and answer any questions.
So I'm not seeing any in the chat space. We'll give folks a few minutes to input their questions. In the meantime, Nancy, do you want to go ahead and put up the poll?
Sure, I'll do that.
So while we wait, I will just make one other sort of plug about the government shutdown and everything that's going on here. NACO's sort of message to the government, and we actually have a press release with some of our other state and local organizations and brethren going out later today, has been that we need a strong, reliable federal partner. That it's important that the federal government not sort of keep counties and state and other local entities in the dark about what certain funding levels are going to be. And sort of beyond that, as counties, we don't have the opportunity or the option of sort of ceasing the work that we do, of shutting down per se, or of not funding certain programs, or even in many cases of running a deficit. So we continue to work with the federal government to help them understand what these sort of shutdown impacts are on our communities, on the economic development sort of process in our community. And really, I guess my pitch would be, if there is a specific impact in your county that you've seen, a program that has dried up, or that you all were anticipating coming in that has not come in yet, of course, please communicate that to your officials so that they, to your member of Congress, to your senators, so that they have a sense of that. But B, we are taking a long, hard look at, putting together a long list of programs that we know of, and certainly it's our job to track those, and we don't mean to put the onus on other folks across the country who are already dealing with a lot of other things, but we want to make sure that our list is as comprehensive as possible. So I would just offer, my email address is on the screen. I would offer an open line for all of you, and if anyone wants to reach out or even has a question about a specific program and whether or not it's moving forward right now, we would love to hear from you. I will, of course, note that it is only a partial government shutdown, which helps curtail that list a little bit. Some of the bigger agencies like Health and Human Services are open. So while there are some pieces in there that might not be quite as fully functioning, for the most part, they're all doing okay, but still would love to just be aware of any impacts that you all are seeing across the country. So with that, I will pause again. And I do think I see one question in the chat on infrastructure policy and whether or not cities and counties are able to approach this issue together. And from NACO's perspective, we work very closely with the National League of Cities on infrastructure. I think many of our priorities are shared. Certainly some of what infrastructure means to our two organizations might be perhaps a little bit different, or the role of cities versus the role of counties might be a little bit different. But the National League of Cities, I won't necessarily speak for them, but I will say they share many of our sort of all of the above approach strategies. They know that local governments need to play a certain role, but also that the federal government should play a role as well. One thing that I will say we are starting to see is the federal government looking more as far as the applicability of that to you all at the local level. The federal government is looking more at certain types of grants that can be used for regional areas or for projects that have more than one entity as a partner. So, the build grant programs, for example, often have a lead agency on them, but we've heard some tell that if there's more than one agency involved or willing to bring resources to the table, that sort of incentivizes the federal government to have it higher on their list. So certainly lots of opportunity there. And like I said, from a sort of messaging standpoint, the counties and the cities here in Washington, at least, are in relatively firm lockstep, and I would say that's even true for many of the state groups as well. Certainly we want to make sure from the county perspective, and this is true from the city perspective as well, that any funding that is going to go out, that's new money, gets at least partially allocated down all the way to the local level without states having the opportunity to take a haircut off the top. But outside of that, I think all of our organizations work very closely together on that issue. Somebody wrote into the chat whether or not NACO is working on projects to help counties anticipate growth in elderly populations and services. That is a great question. We do have a couple of different partnerships with other coalitions and organizations that work on some pieces related to some of the aging demographics, some pieces related to we're part of a program called Dementia Friendly America that looks specifically at the impacts that a community and a county can have on being sort of more dementia focused, dementia friendly, things like that. We certainly, in the healthcare arena and healthcare conversation on policies, are aware, counties own and operate 1,000 nursing homes and long-term care facilities each. So certainly know that is a big piece. Our economic development side is working on on sort of our more program and best practices side is working on a program that would sort of have grant funding and engage in talking about what it means for the workforce to have an aging population. How can you continue to find ways to leverage the expertise of an aging population, keep perhaps the sort of retired part of your community engaged, and then once it's to the point where it's necessary to have health services, human services, things like that, how are counties going to be able to shoulder that burden as well? So certainly we'll make sure to share with the University of Illinois team more information about that when it gets stood up. And in the meantime, would certainly recommend taking a peek at Dementia Friendly America. They are very open to any new county or city that wants to jump in and engage on some of these issues, and would be happy to share their resources as well. This is a great question. Is NACO addressing how counties should prepare for anticipated climate change effects? The short answer is yes. And on our program side, again, we have actually a whole practice called Resiliency that touches on not just how to recover from disasters, but also how to prepare. It does have some economic resiliency sides that can sort of be more in the resilient to economic trends and changes, but there's a whole section that we've worked very closely with the Florida Association of Counties on. We have actually a whole Gulf Coast Gulf States Counties and Parishes Caucus that is all the local elected officials from the Gulf states, and that sort of presents them all a forum to talk about some of these issues very specifically. But we know that some impacts of changing weather patterns are not just in the Gulf area, as is evidenced by the sort of extreme cold that everybody saw this week. So we do have our resiliency practice. Again, our website, I think it was shared in the chat, naco.org. You can find your way to that practice. I would sort of fully open. That's in sort of a different part of our business and organization, but I would be very open and please reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with those folks as well to be able to address some of those issues or make sure we share better resources directly on some of those pieces. Again, the Gulf states partners have really been a leader on this for us, but we work with a couple different foundation partners on this as well. So it's been a great opportunity to start to think about this, and it's something we continue to focus on. In 2017, over 25% of counties had a federally declared disaster in them, and we saw about 17 or 18% of counties have the same in 2018. So definitely an issue that is at the forefront of our mind and that we will continue paying attention to. Question written in on population declines in rural counties, and if there are good examples of places where county governments have taken the lead in organizing local government collaboration or consolidation and providing services. We do have actually a strong, you saw on our list of policy steering committees there, our Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. We also have a group called the Rural Action Caucus that specifically is designed for only counties. We're sort of fluid with what the population cutoff is, because there are certainly some larger counties that have larger counties by population that still have large rural areas within them that have similar challenges and needs. But both of those groups provide a forum for addressing some of those conversations. But we also, again, have a best practice side that mostly on our economic development side, although there has been a little bit on the shared services side, does a lot of work with rural counties. The best thing that I would point you to in NACO's work is something called the Rural Impact County Challenge, which was a cohort of 12 counties, I believe, that went through a sort of technical assistance process with NACO and a couple of our foundation partners. Again, that's Rural Impact County Challenge. And it was focused on the economic development side, but also on the services side. And I don't know that there was too much by way of how you partnered with other counties to achieve those same results, but there certainly was a lot of looking at the changes in demographics in rural counties from a population perspective, and ways to think about those differently, or perhaps access services differently, things like that. Again, I would be happy to take that question as well. Please feel free to reach out to me directly, and happy to share that with the rest of our team, and they can share more specifics. I'm sure the folks who work on that Rural Impact County Challenge side also could share direct examples of counties working together on some of those issues as well. So please take a look at both of those, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions on that.
What a great list of resources that are being provided to us today. So we really appreciate you taking time to share the connectivity, the research that's happening as part of NACO. So thank you. We'll look forward to investigating further all of those suggestions. Just a reminder to today's participants that we did record today's call, and the slides and the key references that were provided by Jack in his presentation today will be a part of a follow-up email to you. We expect that webinar recording to be posted within a couple or 3 days on our local government website. We hope that you'll be able to join us for our next webinar, which will be on February the 7th. In the topic will be presented by Northern Illinois University, looking at a local efficiency assessment program. So if you haven't registered for that, we'll be sending information about how to get registered for that conference as well. Thanks again, Jack. A wonderful presentation, and we greatly appreciate everything that NACO is doing to support local government.
Well, thank you all, and thank you again for the invitation. And like I said, if we can be of service, or if you need more information, please feel free to reach out.